Few housekeeping notes. We are open for your viewing pleasure on Tuesday mornings from 9 to noon, and the second Sunday of every month, which is this Sunday, which is Mother's Day. So grab mom and bring her around. The restrooms are right out the French doors to your left. And without further ado, Mr. Vandella will present our first portrait.
Thank you, Kim. We're excited to have you here to share us a little bit of history about our town. Some of you may have been involved in some of it, for all I know. Some of you would be familiar with some of the people that are going to be shown here tonight. So let me get started. It is likely that the music heard most by those living in the early days of Pittsfield was music sung in religious meetings. Religion was an important component of daily and weekly lives for those who lived in the late 1700s. Due to religious beliefs, most instruments were looked down upon, but within homes across the colonies, lullabies were sung to the children, some ballads were commonly sung, and an occasional fiddle, fife, or horn had been played in the homes. Most religious services at the time were held in homes when an itinerant preacher was passing through or a prayer meeting was held. The earliest record of a religious service in what would become Pittsfield was held in John Cram's corn barn, which was located right about here, in August of 1776, when Reverend Stephen Chase of Newcastle came for a visit and stayed long enough to perform a few sermons for the Sabbath. Pittsfield, being originally part of the northern part of Chichester, became separated in 1782, and one of the first orders of business was to build a meeting house. John Cram sold a parcel of land to the town for 1 ear of corn for the purpose of building a meeting house and establishing a burying ground. The meeting house was eventually completed in 1789, and the first services were held. Singing in these early services was known as deaconing of the psalm. This was performed when the minister would read the psalm, the chorister would name the tune that the song would be sung by, and the deacon would read the psalm aloud, something along this line. By this method, the congregation could remember the song and sing it, for it had been repeated to them several times. Eventually, a choir was formed by those devoted to the practice of singing psalms. Some parishioners took offense when the choir introduced singing the songs without the deaconing. So there was some consternation amongst the church folks. A compromise was reached when the choir, and eventually the choir would sing only after it had been deaconed off. As additional churches opened in Pittsfield, parishioners heard musical styles performed during the services that ranged from complicated fugues to anthems and other, of course, songs. While instrumentals in church were slow to progress, many clergy ignored the playing of instruments in the home, and the fiddlers and other instrumentalists would be relied upon for private pleasure and gatherings. As the end of the first quarter of the 19th century drew nearer, churches in New England began to employ, in paid positions, music directors. They were referred to as singing masters, and were there to unwrap the seemingly mysterious language of written music for the parishioners, teaching them how to read music on their own. It was also during this time that many new compositions to church songs were composed. Of course, organs were already prevalent in many churches, but the arrival of organs being installed in Pittsfield churches is best left for a future discussion. With the advent of the 19th century, most small towns across America had town bands. One of the earliest of record in Pittsfield was known as the Pittsfield Cornet Band, which formed in 1868 by George Sanborn and Charles Sweat. And it consisted of 20 musicians. Notably, they played when the first shovelful of earth was turned for the roadbed of the Suncook Valley Railroad in 1869. They also were recorded as playing at the Town Hall and in the bandstand in 1874. The Pittsfield Brass Band was the highlight of the reunion of the 12th New Hampshire Regiment of the Civil War in 1907. Records show that the Merrimack Brass Band of Pittsfield also performed at Academy Park on a summer evening in 1874. Another notable band was John H. Clark Orchestra, who gave a lively performance at the Grand Army Hall in 1881. They were extremely popular. The name changed to the Pittsfield Orchestra in 1885 when Mr. Clark stepped down as director. Additional bands formed as the years passed, one being the Pittsfield American Band, which came into existence in the spring of 1906. It was directed by Arthur F. Nevers of Concord, once the director of the 1st Regiment Band. The sponsors of the American Band were some of the town's most prominent musicians and citizens, such as Sherman J. Winslow, treasurer of the Pittsfield Savings Bank, who donated $100 a year to support the band, and Frank P. Green, who donated the bandstand in Academy Park, now known as Dustin Park. The Pittsfield American Band gave their first concert in the Academy in August of 1930, August 30th, 1906, under the direction of Arthur Nevers. They played again at the Band Boys Concert and Ball in the Opera House in 1907 to raise funds for the band. The band was very popular, playing at all holiday observances, old home days, and summer band concerts. The band received funding directly from the town beginning in 1913, with a disruption in funding in 1918 due to the First World War. But funding was returned in 1920 and remained until the band disbanded in 1930. The Pittsfield Boys Band formed in the 1930s with George E. Fries, Jr., conductor, inheriting the position from his father, George E. Fries, Sr. They were extremely popular in town, and in the 1940s and 50s, they practiced at the Shipping Room at the Globe. From early experience, George E. Fries Jr. and others formed the Fries Brothers Band, which was very well known. They played all over the state. They played the sounds of Glenn Miller, the Dorsey Brothers, Benny Goodman, and a variety of swing dance music. Band concerts at Academy Park continued up until well into the 1980s. Choral groups, minstrel shows, church choirs, and high school bands, as well as local rock and folk bands, have also played an intricate part in the musical history of Pittsfield. Here are a few images of Pittsfield's great bands during playing at numerous venues throughout the town. Clubs such as the VFW, American Legion, and the Snowshoe Club hosted bands and dancing on most weekend nights. The Washington House hosted entertainment and drew crowds of folks from Pittsfield and well beyond. The history of music in Pittsfield is varied, and the breadth of which can be covered in another presentation. That is a wrap for this portion of the presentation, and Kim Diamede will introduce our special guests.
We are so happy and so excited to have award-winning producer, songwriter, musician, and the owner of Rocking Horse Studio here with us tonight to share with us some of what has been created and produced for the past 20 years at Rocking Horse right here in Pittsfield. Please allow me to introduce Mr. Brian Coombes of Rocking Horse.
It doesn't require anything, I don't think.
Kim. Thanks to everybody here at the Society for inviting us to come down and speak. I say us because a big part of Rocking Horse Studio also involves my wife, Michelle. Absolutely could not have done what I've had the pleasure of doing over the past 20 years without my wife. So quick survey, how many of you are familiar with Rocking Horse Studio? Did you know that there was a world-class recording studio here in Pittsfield? A few of you? Yeah. All right, so I know Mrs. Pipe, our neighbor, knows, because we waved to her.
I saw a production you did in Concord
At the Capitol Center.
yeah, and
Yeah.
also at the, during the summer at the hockey arena.
Granite State.
Oh, the Granite State Music Festival, yeah, so we're actually gonna get into that. So, yeah, I mean, we're just, a little bit about us. Me personally, I was in a rock and roll band, started it in high school, and it went all through college and into our married life. We were signed to a record label in England. We did a lot of touring in the United States, but also in Europe. So England in particular, which does play an important role in our story. I think, you know, we try to do Pittsfield proud. I have a collection of CDs and vinyl albums that were done at Rocking Horse, and in each one of those, in the fine print that says recorded at Rocking Horse Studio, Pittsfield, New Hampshire. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud that we're part of the community. Michelle and I moved up here. It's actually, it'll be 20 years ago next week, where when Michelle and I moved into a property on Upper City Road that was previously owned and well-maintained and beautifully restored by our town historian, Larry, and his wife, Susan. So we hope that we're carrying on the legacy and building the next chapter of the history of that property. Michelle and I looked, when we decided we were living in Manchester, and we had built a pretty sophisticated home studio, but we were in a residential neighborhood, and our garage door opened up directly next to Mike Haddad's bedroom. He was our neighbor. And, you know, when we were doing rock and roll, the way in and out of our basement studio was through our garage door. And literally, it was a tight neighborhood, you know, in the eastern side of Manchester. And Mike's bedroom was up, but he looked down over our driveway. So that was going to be kind of an untenable situation. At first, we thought it was just going to be a home studio. As a songwriter, Michelle sings, Michelle writes songs. We actually did an album together. When my band, that band that I had started in high school, when that ran its course, Michelle and I kind of thought, what are we going to do next? And as a songwriter, I always kind of dreamed of having my own recording studio to record my own songs. But you know, other than being in a studio as a musician, I didn't know the first thing about the technical side of it. And my undergraduate degree is in English. So not exactly the math and science that is required to be efficient in that. But having that liberal arts education taught me one thing, and that taught me how to learn. I've always been a voracious reader, so I dug in. You know, Michelle and I took out a tiny home loan. We bought a bunch of equipment. A lot of that equipment is still functioning now in our here in Pittsfield. Read every single user manual. It was the early days of the internet. Used to go on discussion groups and how do you record this and how do you record that. And then we had some of our friends in and we were recording their band. And if the band had a harmonica, knowing that they were going to be recording the harmonica the next day, I'd be searching on how do you record a harmonica. So much to my surprise, our early offerings, our early works, didn't sound all that bad. So, and they only got better to the point where Michelle and I did a record together. It was the last project that we did. in Manchester. And as part of that, we got an English singer to make a guest appearance on that record. Is anybody familiar with the British band Squeeze? Yeah, so you might know their popular song here was Tempted by the Fruit of Another. So anyway, we had a song that we thought would be perfect to have a low harmony sung by Chris Difford. There were two main singers in Squeeze, and Chris had this kind of baritone voice. He was primarily the lyricist in the band. So, from some of my contacts from all my touring years in England, I had a friend of a friend. We reached out to Chris. Chris liked the song, and then he invited us over to his place in England to record the vocal. So we jumped at the chance. We went out to England. We rented a car. We drove out to a little town called Rye, which is on the south coast. And Michelle and I fell in love with his property and a studio built in a barn and a house next to it. And it was at that point where Michelle and I said, all right, as soon as we finish this record, we're going to sell our property in Manchester, we're going to move out to the country to do the studio. So we were true to that, and we saw 6 properties on one day, and the property on Upper City Road was the 5th of the 6. The property before it, I really liked. It was a big house that had a huge addition. What we were looking for an antique home with a nice piece of land and a barn. We saw lots of wonderful houses with scary barns. We saw lots of wonderful barns built on swamps, right? So the house before the Upper City Road, it was a beautiful house. What was it? It didn't have heat on the second floor. It just had vents that were going to heat upstairs. And then in the basement, it had it had a river running. But it had a beautiful barn. To the point where we felt like it was going to be sacrilege to gut a functioning barn, right? So when we found the property on Upper City Road, like I say, Larry and Susan had done such a wonderful job restoring that home. And we fell in love with Larry's the raspberries and the apple orchard and the cemetery. And yes, the person who built that home is buried in our backyard, which I just think it's absolutely wonderful. It also kind of keeps us humble, right? I mean, we actually there's a song on this record that actually kind of touches on that subject of, we always, and I don't mean to get too philosophical about a musical discussion, but we always say, oh, it's our home, and this is mine, and that's mine. But it puts things into perspective, because once upon a time, John Potter, who built the home, whose initials are etched into one of the beams in our attic, once upon a time, it was his home, right? So actually, the entire concept of this record, which we'll get to, the Circus of Wire Dolls, that's about inanimate objects that come to life. And again, to put things into perspective, there's a good chance that this lectern here it might be older than me, and good Lord willing, it's going to outlive me, as is our home, as is Rocking Horse Studio. Whether it remains a music studio, that's for future generations to decide. But it really kind of humbles you as we sit in our house knowing Larry and Susan lived there, and John Potter built it, and we're not going to be here forever. So where was I? So All right, Michelle's telling me, well, shall we go to?
We fell in love with the property in England. It was a beautiful property.
She's gonna summarize.
We knew we wanted a house in the country, and we found this beautiful property on Upper City Road. Didn't have a barn, but hey, things as they were, the house in Manchester had doubled in value in the short time that we lived there, so boom, we saw the house in Manchester. We have enough to come to Pittsfield and build a barn right on the property. So that's what we did.
And the studio designer, now again, we were gonna make, this was a big life decision for us, and we weren't gonna just build a studio. We hired a studio designer, an acoustician, who was world-renowned. His name is Michael Blackmer, and he had designed quite a few studios that I had recorded in as a musician. So he was absolutely thrilled when we told him that we were going to build a barn from the ground up, because he was worried that an antique barn wasn't going to be able to support the mass that was going to be required to keep the sounds from outside getting in, and the noise that we were going to make from getting out and disturbing Mrs. Fife and Jackson's. And so that was, so he was thrilled about that.
Helen Ship.
And yeah, Helen Schiff was our other neighbor. So, and they all came out to the zoning board meeting when we were applying to run it as a business, and our neighbors have been very supportive and wonderful. So we bought the property in, like I said, in May of 2004. This was the first winter, so we had the barn built. We did not physically build the barn. We built everything on the inside of it. So this was a shot from the very first winter. So that would have been the winter of 2005, probably. One thing I thought was really interesting was, and I don't know if Mrs. Fife thought of this or wondered this, as part of building the studio, it required, like I say, a lot of isolation. And the way to keep sounds from transmitting is mass. So we had a good 30 or 40 or 50 pallets of cinder block delivered, right? So when we first moved in, the neighbors probably thought, oh, the new people are going to have horses, or, and then we had the cinder blocks delivered, and that's when people started to, what are you guys doing there? Turns out it ends up, it would be a really nice fallout shelter, so when that time comes, you're all welcome. So we started construction shortly after. It was in the fall. It was right during the Red Sox run to the World Series. So we actually listened on a radio to a few of those games. Michelle and I had a business partner at the time. It's the gentleman on the left, a wonderful musician and a really great carpenter by the name of Dave Pirog. So we have a few slides of us. This is a shot from the front door looking out to what would be, this is the big room where the musicians play, and over here is where the control room is. We had no concept of the scope of this project. We were wildly naive as far as, we thought we were going to be done in 6 months.
We built the studio in our basement in Manchester. How much
more difficult could it be?
In a big old barn?
We did go through 3 building inspectors. And each one of them had their own particular quirks, right? I think you might even see on the right-hand side in this brick wall. So this is the brick that I'm talking about as far as, in order to keep the peace, that's a cement-filled cinder block wall that goes all the way to the top and all the way around.
And that was built inside
the barn. Right, because the studio designer had said, well, what if you make the studio out of cinder block? And I said, well, that'd just be ugly as sin. I said, could we make it look like a barn, put the cinder blocks on the inside? And he had also proposed the idea of building it underground, which sound so cool. That would have been like a lair. But the water table up on the hill up there, right, with the granite floor is so high that we would have been swimming. So there's a shot, that's my nephew and my dad. Michelle and I built it with the help of my nephew, my dad, Dave's nephews. It was a family event. Look at the stack of drywall. We're hoping that that wasn't the Chinese drywall that gave everybody cancer. So the early projects, and that's a pixelated picture. Because we were wildly delayed in the process of building, we had done a record with a children's singer named Steve Blunt, who I know has performed here in Pittsfield. Wonderful guy. He actually worked with Michelle at the Derryfield School in Manchester. That's how we met. Does children's music, but children's music with, something for the parents to appreciate. And Steve, being a big supporter of what we had done with him in Manchester, he said, Brian, he says, I know that I'm going to do my next album with you. So would it help if I just paid you in advance for the album? Because we were bleeding money every week. Our date night would be on a Friday night. Our date night would be going to Home Depot or Lowe's, loading up the pickup truck so that Dave and I would have the materials to build all weekend. So Steve generously offered to pay us in advance, and the very first album that we recorded in Pittsfield, and it does say recorded in Pittsfield, was Steve Blunt's Out of School. And I can pass this around if you want. I did bring a CD player. If anybody wants to hear anything, either during the presentation or after, we can just kind of, as a group, figure out what we want to do. It has, Steve had a really fantastic concept of having everybody who played on the record pictures of them as little children. So I don't know if you want to pass that around. I'm wearing a Cub Scout uniform, and he put a picture of my wife right next to it. So I don't know if we want to pass that around. But that was the first album that we did. So that will always be near and dear to my heart. So shortly after that, first year, I had just left a pretty cushy job in the software industry to move out to do this full time. Not knowing how it was going to play out, and I was really, really lucky that the first two records that we did are still, to this day, two of my favorite albums with two remarkably talented individuals. There's a gentleman by the name of Will Kindler. He's from Wilton. He was a 19-year-old guy at the time, musical genius with a voice now, and this you guys believe me when I say this, a voice that's a cross between Patsy Cline and Bob Dylan. So just imagine Bob Dylan on helium. It might give you an idea of what Will's voice sounds like. A couple of songs on this record ended up in a major motion picture from Ireland called what? A Kiss for Jet, which is available. We have it physical copy, but there are two songs, including the closing credit of that movie is one of Will's songs. And then we met this other singer-songwriter named Christian Cuff. He was that's Christian, looking pretty haggard on the right. Singer-songwriter from Bath, Maine. He had entered a songwriting contest. I was one of the judges. I fell in love with Christian's music. He didn't win over my objections. But Christian came in and recorded with us. And then the lady next to me is a woman named Ingrid Chavez. She also lived in Wilton. Her big claim to fame is she was Prince's, the musician Prince. She was Prince's spiritual muse. who also appeared in one of his movies, the follow-up to Purple Rain. So the one that wasn't good. She was in that.
Can't remember the name of it.
Graffiti Bridge.
Graffiti Bridge.
Graffiti Bridge
Yeah.
was that. So that was Ingrid, and she was living in Wilton, and she had a crush on Will Kindler. And she started dating Will Kindler, even though Will Kindler was her daughter's age. But these are the tales of rock and roll. So that's, yeah, so these were the first two, and I thought, wow, if it's always going to be this easy, you know, how lucky are we going to be? Wasn't that easy, but it started off so. Again, if we want to pass those are, and if we can open them up too if we want. Yeah, so that's Will Kindler up in the middle. So that's the Bob Dylan, Patsy Cline guy with the white shirt. I love all these young guys with the hair. Right? It looks like a Pantene commercial. So, and this also started, this was into our phase now, we were working with a lot of people from Maine. That's Christian on the right, and then the two guys seated are in other bands from Portland, and the gentleman up on the right, who has sadly passed away, they were all really talented singer-songwriters from Portland, because, you know, we thought, here we are in Pittsfield, New Hampshire. So we were making inroads into the music scene in Concord, and a lot of people that had worked with us when we were in Manchester were coming up to Pittsfield, but there was a limited supply, and in the early days, people didn't know us, so we were actively going out and getting projects. So we ended up doing a lot of projects with people from Portland. So this slide, at some point, our studio transitioned from being a studio for hire. Basically, it's a building with equipment. You come in, we set up the mics, we push the buttons, and that's as far as it goes. That's where we started. Somewhere a couple of years into it, people started to want to work with us for the expertise that we were developing. And that's when I kind of switched from being just a recording engineer to a producer. It just kind of happened naturally. And we also worked with, and continue to work with, a lot of singer-songwriters who come in with the idea of wanting a record with a full band, but they don't have a full band. So we, over the course of projects, kind of accumulated different musicians. And these two guys, I started working with in about 2009, 2010. They're still with me today. They're part of our own project that, again, we'll get into a little bit. So yeah, just the human capital. You know, Michelle and I are really blessed that we have, and I think there's a shot of Josh Kimball, who works with me every day at the studio. He came in as a college intern 12 years ago, 13 years ago.
Annually, we bring in just a couple of interns, high school, college, just people that come in, want to know what it's all about, shadow for a day, a week, a month, whatever. Josh was our first ever intern, and he ended up staying on, and now he's the only one on our payroll. We have one employee.
And he's Josh, every day. That's young Josh, way down on the bottom right there. I was going to say young Josh in the middle. Does anybody know who that gentleman is in the middle? No guesses? So his name is Garth Hudson. He was the keyboard player in a band called The Band.
Oh.
Yeah. So that's Garth Hudson. Something that we've kind of developed over the years is going different places to get special guests to appear on records. So in this particular picture, this group of guys, including Will Kindler, laughing his butt off because he had asked Garth Hudson a lot of questions. That was in upstate New York, a studio in New York. And Garth Hudson, God bless him, was completely incoherent and musically,
Sharp, isn't it?
we just, no, he was frightfully terrible. Like, you know, like, we had to keep checking to see if what he was listening to in the headphones was the right song. Like, he wasn't in the key, he wasn't rhythmically, and again, to this day, I don't know if he had just lost it, because in the band, he was the one who used to give them music lessons. You know, he was the musician's musician in that band. So that's why the idea of, we had done a record with Bob Dylan's musical director, bass player, and we got to talking about Garth Hudson, and he's the one who put us in touch with Garth to do that session. But what do you do? I mean, the man's a musical legend, and Will had paid for this project, and Dusty Gray, this is the Dusty Gray band, had paid for Garth to play. So really what we ended up doing was taking just as much stuff as we could, and then in the computer, I would say, ooh, okay, Garth is playing a G chord there, let's cut that out. Here's a G chord, here's an F chord, and we literally pasted his performance together so as to not waste the opportunity. So that's Garth. So in 2012, and I do have notes on these, but we'll see how we do. 2012, New Hampshire Magazine presented us with our first Best of New Hampshire, which was for recording studio. It was an editor's choice. It wasn't, wasn't something that was voted on like Best Restaurant, which we should be voting for Tim's Place. So, as part of winning that, the people at New Hampshire Magazine asked us if we would perform at their Best of New Hampshire show as the house band. We were thrilled to do that. That was at the Verizon Wireless Arena, and this was kind of our group. We had developed our group of session musicians. You see Eric and Myron, again, the guitar player and the drummer. And that's Dusty Gray, Concord's own Dusty Gray on the far left. And yeah, it was a great group, talented people. Will Kindler smiling in the middle. So that's good there. So also in 2012, I'm lucky that I'm constantly asked to be involved in cool, fun things. And one of the things was working with somebody that has become a really good friend of mine over the years, Ken Kale from, at the time, WTPL The Pulse in Concord.
And the voice of the Manchester Monarchs.
The voice of the Monarchs. And we developed something called the Pulse Pick of the Week, where I would pick a local band and either play a recorded song, or, in this case, that's Tristan Ullman from Manchester, performing live on the station. And I did that with Ken for 4, 5, 6 years, until the show got canceled. And then, again, another thing that we did, we started to present shows in various guises. Some of them were Rocking Horse Presents, and this was a Rocking Horse Presents show that was the Farewell to Summer concert. We also did, I was part of the Granite State Music Festival, and we also worked with the people here in Pittsfield to get live music for the balloon rally. And yeah, it's kind of a cool snapshot of some of the people that we were working with at the time. That's the Rocking Horse crew playing with Will Kindler at the Granite State Music Festival. And then in 2013, I met this gentleman seated next to me. His name is Patrick Gochez, a wonderfully talented singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist. He had gone to Berkeley School of Music, and friends of mine who were friends of his said, "You've got to check out his band. You're going to love the band," because it was kind of everything that I loved. It was Beatle-ish, melodic, lots of vocal harmonies, intelligent lyrics, and so that's me with his band, The Hats, Pat and the Hats, which then changed their name to just The Hats, which I get it. You know, everybody thought Pat and the Hats was kind of a jokey thing, but I thought it was snappy and it was easy to search for, as opposed to doing a search for a band called The Hats, right? So another wonderful thing that we were asked to do was the New Hampshire Chronicle Christmas at Rocking Horse Studio television program that we filmed on Veterans Day weekend. It was actually shortly after some of the people from Channel 9 had come to our farewell to summer show and said, "Hey, could we adapt this into a Christmas show?" So we turned Rockin' Horse Studio into a festive delight. It started a relationship with Channel 9 that continues to this day. I think me and various projects that I've been involved in have probably been on New Hampshire Chronicle more than anybody else in the state of New Hampshire. So I have to be careful about when I pitch them a story, because they have to keep it fair and balanced, obviously. But so that's little Carter Shade, who was what, 13 at the time? 12, 13, he played piano on a couple of songs, and that's the entire crew from NH, New Hampshire Chronicle. So that happened, and that broadcast right before Christmas in 2013.
Yeah, it was an hour-long Christmas special with all New Hampshire performers, and it was just a really, really beautiful, all Christmas tunes. And yeah, they came and hung out the whole day on Veterans Day weekend, and the musicians just played take after take after take. They got all the footage. Mary and Dennis Strait sent up a bunch of like fritters and apple crisp from
the
Applebee
orchard.
Orchard and cider, and they helped make it a really festive November afternoon. And then it aired multiple times right around Christmas.
Yeah, and then it aired for a few years. It aired during the Christmas holiday. They didn't bite on, last year would have been the 10-year anniversary, and I did ask them, I thought it would have been fantastic to do an anniversary, which getting Carter Shade, who's 10 years older than he is, right? And then, obviously work with, new people that we've worked with since. So, so the following year, I received my first nomination for Producer of the Year from the New England Music Awards. The New England Music Awards probably sounds more impressive than it really is. Working with them over the years now, don't get ahead. That one is impressive. But the New England Music Awards, we had, working with them behind the curtain, I was able to kind of see the inner workings of the awards show thing, and it gets kind of icky, And the thing that I really, really didn't like was vote for, right? The idea of having to get all your friends to vote for me and that's just distasteful for me. Which maybe explains why since 2013, every year since 2013, I've been nominated for Producer of the Year award, and I've only won once. So, and the one year that we did win, after this year, we kind of made a concerted effort and said, okay, we're going to play the game a little bit. And we went to all the New England Music Award functions, and we did have people vote, and so we won it once, and that's enough But something that was even more impressive was we were nominated for 2 Emmy Awards for the New Hampshire Chronicle Christmas at Rocking Horse Studio. So, next slide. Michelle and Josh and I got to go down to Boston for the Emmy Awards.
Remote.
Well, yeah, it was the
Yeah.
regional Emmy Awards. Channel 9 shared a table with Channel 5. Josh and I were the only 2 people sitting at that table who were nominated who didn't win. And Josh and I both actually kind of panicked because we were like in the middle of the room, right? And Josh and I were like, if they call us, which way are we going to go? And then and the winner is, and it wasn't us, and the adrenaline just dropped the 2 of us. And it was kind of a relief, but it was also kind of sad. But we won another Best of New Hampshire Award in 2014. That one for me as a producer. So we can move through. This is just a collection of records. We were really starting to produce records that we were really proud of, with some really talented artists. The gentleman on the very top is Justin Cohn. He ends up playing, along with Pat, plays an important role, and he and I, along with Pat, that's Pat in the middle there, ended up writing a lot of songs together. One of which was a song called I Would Save You. We were asked to provide the music for an independent film out of Concord that was being developed called Granite Orpheus. And so Pat and I ended up writing kind of a love theme. It was called I Would Save You. It was a retelling of the Greek myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, and Orpheus going down into Hades to try to bring the love of his life back to life. And we were asked to write a song, and we got Alex Preston, most famous in New Hampshire for his time on American Idol. That's Alex on the left. So he ended up singing the song. And then, there it is, the producer of the year the following year.
The Susan Ducci of the producer of the year.
Yeah.
Nominated, finally won one. Yay.
So at that New England Music Award performance, we were asked to perform. Pat's band, The Hats, also won an award that year. Dusty Gray also won an award that year, so you can kind of see that it was, we had all kinds of, it was a rocking horse year. So as part of the performance, we were asked if we could do a song. We had befriended the gentleman with the blonde hair. The second one in from the left is Greg Hawkes from the Cars, keyboard player from the Cars. He's become a good friend of mine. He comes up and does sessions. He's eaten at Town Pizza. Back when Town Pizza was around. We miss it, right? And so yeah, this band, that was basically Pat and the Hats plus Greg and I, we performed a song that Greg wrote in the Cars called Moving in Stereo at the New England Music Awards. So that was fun.
That's right in our yard.
There it is.
After having done the New Hampshire Chronicle Christmas show, we have 5 minutes left? Ooh. Okay, so we're going to have to wrap up that. We started doing shows at the Capitol Center, and we did Capitol Center for years and years. This is me with Anthony Phillips, the original guitar player from Genesis, who has done a bunch of sessions with me over the years. One project that we did with Ant and Steve Hackett from Genesis was a charity called Harmony for Elephants. Dale Newman, who worked for Genesis, came to America to record his own album at our studio. We worked with Kenwood Denard. Kenwood Denard is a jazz fusion drummer Vernon Reed from Living Color, and Stanley Jordan, the phenomenal guitar player. That's that project. There's me with Tony Banks from Genesis at Genesis's studio in England. We were touring with an artist at the time. Dale Newman had a new bunch of songs that he hadn't recorded with us in New Hampshire that he really wanted to record. I said, hey, look, we're going to be in England. We have a couple of days off on the schedule. Talk to Mike Rutherford and Tony Banks, see if we can use the farm to record them, and we'll record them. So we spent a couple of days doing that. This was from our last year doing the Christmas show at the Cap Center. It was our first year doing it on the big stage. So that's that. That leads into our song. All of the, kind of the first 10 years that we were in business, I was so focused on getting other people's music recorded that I hadn't really done any music of my own. Pat Gochez and I wrote a gospel song called Everywhere is Home. We had the London Sing Gospel Choir sing on that. It was a song kind of inspired by, that's Justin and I with the London Sing Gospel Choir at a church in London. That's Caroline Carter, Miss New Hampshire, former Miss New Hampshire. We did a record with her.
She does a
lot of stuff.
Session singing at Rocking Horse. She's a wonderful person.
She's a wonderful person. She's a nurse now. Evelyn Cormier, another person that you might have seen on American Idol.
Yeah.
She's actually in Nashville now. She's about to sign a big deal in Nashville. She's another one like Caroline who does a lot of sessions for us. So our group of session musicians, plus Justin and I, became a band. And we released that record every change of seasons. And we went out and toured in Europe. That's us in England at this remarkably cool, this is kind of like our home away from home. It's in East Sussex. It's a concert venue built into an old manor house. That's us on that tour. We performed for the Prime Minister, Theresa May. We had some interesting conversations, political conversations about Donald Trump in particular in that day. That's kind of what we're all smiling about.
Yeah.
We won another Best of New Hampshire award for Best Supergroup because New Hampshire was loaded with them, so we were the best of the bunch. And Evelyn also won. And then we performed at, that was the Best of New Hampshire show at the Fisher Cats Stadium in Manchester. Evelyn was on New Hampshire Chronicle. We did a tribute album to the music of Anthony Phillips, again, the original guitar player from Genesis. He left Genesis before Phil Collins joined Genesis because of stage fright. He left, he went to school with all the guys, everything was fine, and then just snap of a finger, he got stage fright, he had to leave. He released a bunch of solo records that didn't really do anything because he couldn't go out and perform live. So we ended up doing a tribute album with him and then went back to Trading Boundaries, that's us rehearsing for that. And then we went back to Trading Boundaries in England and did 2 shows, the first live performances of Ant Phillips's music ever. And the man himself was in attendance at that show. There's Caroline singing at that show. That's us with Ant after the show. Then we hit COVID and everything changed, right? We were running high 2019. We came back in the fall, November. Everything was wonderful. Ready to do a new record. Michelle and I had bought a new 7-foot concert grand piano, and then COVID hit. New Hampshire Chronicle did a series that summer called Summer Song Fest to give local artists some exposure. So we did our song Everywhere is Home acoustically. Then we started working during COVID on our new record. That's Greg Hawkes. He played sax on our tune. We did Caroline's album. That was my water. I rejoined the Recording Academy, so I vote. I got to do my civic duty and vote in the Grammys. That's what that is. Pat and Josh and I went to Abbey Road for the first time to play the same pianos that the Beatles played on all of their records. That's us with a couple of our English special guests at Abbey Road. That's the London Sing Gospel Choir with Tony Grapponi, who is related to the Grapponi Auto Group in Concord. Which leads us to Circus Choir Dolls, which you see right here. That's our record. It came out in 2022. It was the album of the year in 2022 on prog radio. Progressive rock is what the genre is. It's Genesis, yes, Rush, Pink Floyd, if that's the type of thing that's considered prog rock. They voted us as their album of the year. And prog radio, this was another award that we won for Best Concept Album. We went back and played 2 shows back at Trading Boundaries. I just love how that place looks lit up at night. That's us performing that show. And then I returned to Abbey Road 2 more times in 2023, bringing other clients from here to record the London Sing Gospel Choir and to record strings there in England. It actually ends up being more efficient to get our string players who come from Boston and New York, to get them to come to Pittsfield. It's actually less expensive to hire string players who live and work right in London. But Abbey Road isn't expensive, so you have to kind of balance it. But yeah, so I've been paid to go to London I write the string arrangement, and then I go and I record them. And it's members of the London Symphony Orchestra, the London Contemporary Orchestra. 2 of the people that I work with have played on Taylor Swift records. So be impressed. Yes. They have not met her. Taylor wasn't even in the country when it was done, but they were on the records.
I think what's most special about our place on the hill is just how many just ordinary, regular people, like, yes, these are really cool things, but we're talking about sisters and grandpas and, friends and just coming in. They've got these songs inside them, and I've always wanted to record this song, or I wanted to, pass this on to my grandkids before I go. Like, it's such an amazing place for just people to take the music that's inside of them. Just, we help them bring it out and put some structure to it and make it sound how they want it to sound. And there are so many just average, ordinary people that come through the door of every musical genre you can imagine. Polka singers and children singers and
Ukrainian folk
music, hip hop and spiritual Christian worship music.
And one lady who had us, who wanted us to record her reciting the Rosary.
Yeah,
which was actually a wonderful project. I thoroughly enjoyed that one.
So anyway, it's really accessible. Like, I think the fear is that people just think, oh, I couldn't record there. We can't go there. It's so very, very much accessible to anyone who wants to just bring, spend an afternoon and play a song.
Young kids, older people.
Yeah, we do birthday parties and, all the kids singing along. Mommy, baby. But, whatever it is, holiday, Christmas tunes, you name it. People, spoken word. We had.
And Romney.
Her memoir, she actually read it. She spent a week and showed up and read it.
And that was 2016, before the election, and that was wonderful, just interesting to get her insights. She sat on our screen porch, and we had lunch every day for a week, and she would refer to, Mitt and I do, we sit out on the porch and we see deer, and she was wildly wrong in her prediction of what was going to happen.
Yeah, she did think Trump was going to win.
Questions?
Yeah. Gosh.
Yes, ma'am.
It's not a question, it's sort of a comment. I'm one of the ordinary people that came up in 2011 and recorded about a dozen of my father's favorite hymns on piano. And I was able to present that CD to him on his 101st birthday.
Wow.
And then come ahead to 2020, and we have that piano that I played is now home at
At the
home
church.
in the congregational church.
It was-
Really?
That's right, that's right, that's right.
Yes.
How did you get your name?
That was a tough one, coming up with, right? But the name came from our home studio in New Hampshire. We had that Baldwin piano in Manchester. We had the Baldwin piano. And there was a rocking horse that Michelle's mother had given us.
Pier 1.
Pier 1 imports, a rocking horse. And while Michelle and I were writing songs, I would sit at the piano and she would sit at the rocking horse. And I was in an MBA program at the time and doing a marketing class, and I thought I'd do a marketing plan on how to make a recording studio successful, but I didn't have a name. So one day I was looking around, Rocking Horse. Oh, Rocking Horse Studio. Rocking, as in, I thought we'd have a logo with a rocking horse with a guitar strap on its back. And it stuck. So that's Rocking Horse Studio. So yeah, Michelle is right. I mean, it's fun to talk about the glamorous stuff and traveling overseas, but anything that we do overseas comes back here. And it usually starts here in Pittsfield, and if it goes to someplace exotic, it always comes back and it finishes. I mean, this is home to us, and we're proud of being here. And I love fewer people are recording, manufacturing physical product now. But, some people do, and when they do, I always love seeing recorded at, and it always says Pittsfield, New Hampshire. So, we're happy to be here.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, that was wonderful.
Thank you. Sorry I went long.
No.
No.
Fabulous. Thank you all for coming. There are some refreshments right through the French doors. And again, thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.